One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. Sometimes the cruelest insults are spoken with a smile, and in a language the other person is never supposed to understand. The rain hammered against the tall glass windows of Maison Rivière, while Manhattan's elite moved beneath crystal chandeliers like they owned the night itself. Expensive heels clicked across imported marble. Champagne glasses chimed softly beneath the slow rhythm of a live jazz piano. Everything inside the restaurant whispered money. Old money. Quiet money. The kind that didn't need to prove itself. Clara Whitmore balanced 3 plates carefully against her arm as she crossed the crowded dining room in her simple black uniform. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly. No jewelry except a tiny silver necklace hidden beneath her collar. Nothing about her suggested privilege. Nothing about her suggested she belonged among the people sitting beneath golden light, discussing mergers worth hundreds of millions of dollars over truffle risotto and $1,200 Bordeaux. Table 12 needs their wine pairings, called the manager nervously. And be careful, that's Damien Ashford. Clara nodded once. Calm, quiet, professional. But several waitresses exchanged looks behind her back. Everyone in Manhattan knew Damien Ashford. Billionaire investor. Ruthless negotiator. The kind of man who made entire companies disappear before breakfast. He was handsome in the coldest possible way. Dark suit, silver watch, sharp jawline, sharp eyes, sharp everything. Men wanted to impress him. Women wanted his attention. And according to restaurant gossip, he enjoyed humiliating people almost as much as making money. Clara approached the table with steady hands. Damien barely looked up from the leather folder in front of him. 5 executives sat around him laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny. Good evening, sir, Clara said softly. Can I start anyone with sparkling or still water? Damien finally lifted his eyes toward her. Just one glance. But something in his expression immediately changed. Not attraction. Assessment. Like he was measuring whether she belonged. In the room. You're the waitress tonight? He asked casually. Clara smiled politely. That's usually how the uniform works. One of the executives snorted into his whiskey. Damien's mouth twitched slightly. Amused despite himself. Interesting. He murmured before switching suddenly into rapid French. J'espère au moins tu es cette tenir un plateau sans tout renverser. The table burst into restrained laughter. Clara continued pouring water calmly. One executive avoided eye contact entirely. Another smirked openly. Damien leaned back comfortably, clearly pleased with himself. The sentence had been deliberate, sharp enough to humiliate her if she understood, safe enough if she didn't. He had just said, hopefully she knows how to carry a tray without spilling everything. Clara placed the bottle down carefully. Her expression never changed, but her fingers paused for half a second against the crystal glass. Then she answered in flawless Parisian French, so smooth, even the piano player glanced up from across the room. Actually, sir, the correct pronunciation is renverser, not renvaser. Otherwise, you accidentally asked whether I could survive a flood. Silence. Absolute silence. One executive choked on his wine. Another looked down immediately to hide his smile. Damien Ashford froze completely. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just still. The kind of stillness powerful men entered when something genuinely surprised them. Clara continued calmly in French while adjusting silverware beside the table. And for future reference, insulting the staff works better when your accent doesn't sound like an American tourist fighting for his life in Paris. The oldest investor at the table suddenly burst into uncontrollable laughter. Real laughter. Loud enough to turn nearby heads across the dining room. Damien stared at Clara as though the entire room had shifted sideways. Her French wasn't merely fluent. It was elegant, educated, refined in a way that couldn't be learned from language apps or business school electives. Clara finally looked directly at him. Her blue eyes calm, unshaken. Would you still like the Bordeaux recommendation, sir? She asked in perfect English. Damien blinked once before slowly closing the leather folder in front of him. You speak French, he said unnecessarily. You mock people in French, Clara replied softly. We all have hobbies. Another executive nearly spit out his drink, trying not to laugh. Damien looked around the table. For the first time in years, he was the one being silently watched, judged, measured. And somehow the young waitress standing beside him looked more composed than anyone wearing a $5,000 suit. Clara picked up the wine menu elegantly. The Margot pairs better with the ribeye. she said professionally. Unless you plan on insulting the chef too. In that case, I'd recommend something cheaper. Even Damien couldn't stop it this time. A short laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Quick, genuine, dangerous. Clara noticed immediately. So did everyone else. Because men like Damien Ashford did not laugh when they lost. They destroyed people instead. But strangely, he couldn't stop looking at her. At the calm confidence beneath the waitress uniform. At the intelligence she clearly wasn't trying to show off. At the tiny trace of amusement hidden behind her professional mask. Somewhere near the piano, the jazz music softened. Rain continued sliding down the windows overlooking Manhattan. And for the first time that evening, Damien Ashford completely forgot about the billion-dollar deal sitting unopened in front of him. The next night, Damien Ashford returned to Maison Rivière 30 minutes earlier than his reservation required. That alone was enough to make his assistant nervous. Damien was never early. Time, according to every business magazine in America, bent around men like him. Yet there he stood near the entrance beneath warm chandelier light, while rainwater dripped slowly from the shoulders of his charcoal overcoat. Your table is ready, Mr. Ashford, the hostess said carefully. Damien glanced across the restaurant almost immediately, looking for her. Clara Whitmore moved between tables carrying a silver tray balanced effortlessly on one hand, while quietly explaining wine selections to an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. She smiled differently with them. Softer, real, not the sharp amusement she had used against him the night before. Damien loosened his tie slightly, annoyed with himself for noticing. Would you like your usual table? The hostess asked. No, the answer came too quickly. Damien cleared his throat. Somewhere near the piano. The hostess blinked once in surprise. Damien Ashford hated live music during business dinners. Too distracting. Too emotional. Yet 10 minutes later he sat alone beneath dim amber lighting with a crystal tumbler untouched beside him while pretending to review contracts he had not actually read once. His attention kept drifting toward Clara. She was different tonight. Less guarded somehow. At one point she crouched beside a little boy near table 6 and helped him pronounce a difficult French dessert name until the child burst into laughter. 20 minutes later she disappeared briefly into the kitchen and returned carrying a tiny birthday candle balanced on cheesecake for an exhausted nurse still wearing hospital scrubs. She moved through the restaurant like someone quietly stitching warmth into every corner without asking for credit. Damien hated how much he noticed it. You are staring, said a dry voice beside him. Damien looked up to find Victor Laurent, one of the older investors from the previous evening, lowering himself into the opposite chair with a grin. I am observing. Victor laughed. That waitress embarrassed you in 2 languages, and now you look like a man trying to solve a murder mystery. Damien took a slow sip of whiskey. You found that amusing. Everyone found that amusing. Victor leaned closer. Especially because she was right about your accent. Damien exhaled sharply through his nose. My French is perfectly functional. For ordering croissants at airports perhaps. Victor smiled wider. But that girl? That was Paris. Real Paris. Damien said nothing. Across the room Clara suddenly stopped beside the old piano near the bar. The pianist had stepped away briefly. One broken note echoed awkwardly from the instrument. Clara frowned slightly. Then, believing nobody important was watching, she lifted the wooden cover and adjusted something carefully. Inside, 2 seconds later the piano sounded perfect again. Damien noticed immediately. Interesting, he murmured quietly. Victor followed his gaze. You know what bothers you most? Damien did not answer. It is not that she humiliated you. It is that she did it without trying. Before Damien could respond, Clara approached the table carrying menus. Calm as ever. Good evening, gentlemen. Her eyes moved toward Damien briefly. Your French survived the night, I hope. Victor burst into delighted laughter while Damien leaned back slowly in his chair. Barely, he admitted. Clara handed Victor a wine list. I recommend the Napa Valley Cabernet tonight. The Bordeaux might still be offended from yesterday. Damien stared at her. Do you always talk to customers this way? Only the memorable ones. She turned slightly to leave before Damien spoke again. You fixed the piano. Clara paused. Excuse me. The sustain pedal was sticking. Damien nodded toward the instrument. You repaired it. Something flickered across her face. Surprise. Not because he had noticed. Because he understood what he noticed. It was bothering me, she said carefully. Most people would not hear the difference. Damien rested his glass against the table. Most people are not listening. For the first time since meeting him, Clara looked genuinely caught off guard. The moment lasted only a second before the bartender suddenly shouted from across the room. "Clara, your favorite millionaire is asking for you again." Several waitresses laughed openly. Clara closed her eyes briefly in embarrassment while Damien raised one eyebrow. "Favorite millionaire?" Clara sighed. 83 years old. Tips and lottery tickets. "And am I at least ranked above him?" Damien asked before he could stop himself. Clara stared at him for one dangerous second. Then the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "He speaks better French." Victor nearly choked laughing again, while Damien watched Clara walk away through golden light and soft piano music. But this time he did not feel insulted. He felt something much more unfamiliar. Curious. Because beneath the waitress uniform and quiet confidence, Clara Whitmore carried herself like someone who belonged in rooms far more powerful than this one. And Damien Ashford had spent his entire life learning one rule above all others. Truly dangerous people never needed to announce themselves. Powerful men hate two things most: being ignored and being outsmarted. 3 nights later, Damien Ashford walked into Maison Rivière carrying the calm confidence of a man who had already decided he would win this time. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath cold February rain, while black SUVs lined the curb like silent bodyguards. Inside, the restaurant breathed warmth and jazz and candlelight. Clara Whitmore noticed him immediately the moment he entered. Not because he was loud. Damien never needed volume. The entire room simply shifted slightly whenever he arrived. Waiters straightened their posture. Investors lowered their voices. Even the bartender quietly fixed his tie. Damien removed his coat slowly and handed it to the hostess before speaking in perfect Italian. "Buonasera. Spero che la mia cameriera preferita sia sopravvissuta alla mia tragedia francese." Good evening. I hope my favorite waitress survived my French tragedy. The hostess blinked in confusion. Clara, however, looked up from polishing wine glasses near the bar. Her expression remained calm. But there it was again. That tiny flicker in her eyes. Amusement. She approached his table carrying a leather menu. "Your Italian is much better," she admitted. Damien leaned back slightly. "I practiced." "That explains the confidence." He almost smiled. "And here I thought you would be impressed." Clara placed the menu down carefully. "Mr. Ashford, rich men are always convinced speaking another language automatically makes them mysterious. Does it not?" "No," she folded her arms lightly. "Usually it just means they spent one semester abroad and came back emotionally attached to espresso." The man at the neighboring table laughed so hard he nearly dropped his fork. Damien looked genuinely offended for approximately 2 seconds before a reluctant grin pulled at the corner of his mouth. "You enjoy this entirely too much. Only because you keep returning for more." She turned to leave, but Damien stopped her with a simple question. "Tell me something honestly, Clara." She paused. "That depends how expensive the honesty is." "Why are you working here?" The question landed softly between them. No mockery this time. No game. Clara studied him carefully. "People work in restaurants every day, Damien." The sound of his first name in her voice caught him off guard. Low, smooth, unexpectedly personal. "Not people like you," he replied quietly. Clara tilted her head slightly. "And what exactly are people like me?" Damien opened the menu without reading a single word. "You know wine better than most sommeliers. You fixed a Steinway piano in under 30 seconds. Your French sounds like old Paris and your Italian sounds Roman." He looked back up at her. "So either you are secretly a European spy, or something does not add up." Clara stared at him for one long second before reaching for the wine bottle beside the table. "Would you like the Cabernet, or would you prefer to continue your investigation?" "Investigation. That costs extra." Damien laughed quietly under his breath. Across the dining room, several waitresses exchanged stunned looks. Nobody teased Damien Ashford this casually. Nobody survived doing it twice. Yet somehow Clara Whitmore made the billionaire look less dangerous every time she spoke to him. Later that evening, the restaurant grew louder as Wall Street executives filled the dining room after market close. Glasses clinked. Jazz drifted softly through the air. Near the bar, a drunk investor in a velvet jacket attempted to impress 2 women by loudly mispronouncing French wine names. Clara corrected him politely twice before finally taking the menu from his hands. "Sir, she said gently. At this point, you are not ordering wine anymore. You are summoning ancient spirits. The women burst into laughter. Even the bartender bent over, coughing into a napkin, trying not to choke. Damien watched the scene from across the room with growing fascination. Clara never tried to command attention. Attention simply followed her naturally. A few minutes later, she returned carrying his dinner plate. Ribeye, medium rare. And before you ask, yes, the chef still remembers you insulted his truffle sauce last year. Damien frowned slightly. How do you know that? Clara set the plate down smoothly. You called it aggressively emotional. Damien blinked slowly. I did say that. You also said the mashed potatoes tasted financially irresponsible. For the first time in years, Damien Ashford looked completely speechless. Clara finally allowed herself a small victorious smile. The staff remembers everything, Damien. Then she walked away beneath golden chandelier light, while soft piano music drifted through the restaurant, and Damien sat motionless staring after her, with something dangerously close to admiration growing quietly behind his eyes. Because somewhere between the sarcasm and the intelligence and the impossible calm, Clara Whitmore had done something no boardroom competitor had ever managed to do. She made Damien Ashford genuinely want to earn someone's respect. The strangest connections are born in the exact moment two people stop pretending. Manhattan disappeared beneath rain that night. Streets reflected gold and silver beneath blurred headlights, while cold wind swept between skyscrapers like the city itself was exhaling. Maison Rivière had finally closed after midnight. Chairs rested upside down on tables. The piano sat silent beneath dim amber light. Clara Whitmore stepped outside wearing a long wool coat and carrying a paper bag with leftover pastries tucked beneath one arm. Her shift had lasted almost 14 hours. Her feet hurt. Her hair smelled faintly like coffee beans and expensive wine. Yet for some reason, she found herself smiling slightly while replaying Damien Ashford attempting Italian with the confidence of a man who had never once feared embarrassment in his life. A black Aston Martin sat crookedly near the curb 50 feet away. Hood open. Hazard lights blinking uselessly through heavy rain. Clara slowed immediately. Damien stood beside the car holding his phone toward the sky with visible irritation. Water soaked through his dark coat, while two black SUVs idled farther down the street. His security team looked equally miserable. Clara walked closer carefully. Please tell me the Billionaire did not lose a fight with a car battery. Damien turned sharply before recognizing her. Something in his expression relaxed almost instantly. It is not the battery. That is exactly what people say right before it is the battery. One of the security guards coughed awkwardly to hide a laugh. Damien shot him a look. The engine overheated. Clara stared at the expensive car silently while rain drummed softly against umbrellas and pavement. How tragic, she said finally. Such a young engine. Damien rubbed his forehead. You are enjoying this far too much. You spent 2 weeks trying to interrogate me in 3 languages. Let me have this. Even Damien smiled slightly at that. Then suddenly bright camera flashes exploded from across the street. Paparazzi. 2 photographers rushed toward the sidewalk shouting Damien's name while raising cameras through the ring. Mr. Ashford, is it true the merger deal collapsed? Are you dating the actress from Los Angeles? Damien's expression darkened immediately. Clara noticed the shift. Instant. Precise. Like a wall snapping back into place. One photographer stepped dangerously close to the broken car, trying to get a better angle. Sir, can we get one photo? Damien exhaled sharply. Not tonight. Another flash exploded directly into his face. Clara reacted before thinking. She grabbed Damien's sleeve suddenly and pulled him backward toward the narrow bookstore beside the restaurant entrance. Move. Damien blinked once in confusion before following her through the small doorway, just as another round of flashes burst outside. The bookstore smelled like dust and old paper and cinnamon tea. Soft jazz played quietly somewhere near the back shelves. An elderly woman behind the register barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. Evening, Clara. Evening, Mrs. Green. Clara grabbed a wool scarf from a display rack and tossed it toward Damien. Put that on. What? Unless you want tomorrow's headlines reading Billionaire found emotionally arguing with car during rainstorm. Damien stared at her for 1 second before actually obeying. He wrapped the scarf awkwardly around his neck while Clara reached up and pushed his wet hair slightly beneath the coat collar. The movement froze both of them unexpectedly. Close now. Too close. Damien could smell vanilla and coffee on her coat. Clara suddenly became aware of how absurdly blue his eyes looked beneath warm bookstore lighting. She stepped back immediately. There, she said quickly. Now you look like an exhausted philosophy professor instead of a billionaire. Damien glanced toward the bookstore mirror. This scarf has cats on it. Mrs. Green knits aggressively. The old woman behind the counter pointed without looking up. That one took me 6 months. Damien nodded respectfully. It is magnificent. Clara covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Outside, the paparazzi still waited beneath umbrellas near the sidewalk. Damien leaned carefully toward the bookstore window. They will stay another 20 minutes at least. Then you are trapped here with books and ordinary people. Terrifying. Damien looked around the tiny bookstore quietly. Shelves crowded together. Rain tapping gently against windows. A sleepy orange cat curled beside the heater. Strange how peaceful it felt compared to penthouse meetings and black-tie galas. Clara moved toward a nearby shelf and picked up a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Your favorite revenge fantasy? Damien asked softly. No, she smiled faintly while flipping through pages. My favorite reminder that rich men create most of their own problems. Damien laughed unexpectedly. Real laughter this time. Warm enough that even Mrs. Green peeked over her crossword in surprise. For a moment, the city outside disappeared entirely. No billion-dollar deals. No cameras. No power games. Just a tired waitress and a billionaire standing quietly between old books while rain softened Manhattan into silver light beyond the windows. Then Clara noticed Damien staring at her again. Not the way powerful men usually looked at beautiful women. This was quieter. More dangerous somehow. Like he was trying to understand something instead of possess it. What? She asked softly. Damien hesitated briefly before answering. You treat me like a normal person. Clara closed the book gently. Maybe because. Underneath the watch and the headlines, you are one. Silence settled between them. Gentle. Uncomfortable in the best possible way. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. The truth about someone rarely arrives dramatically. Sometimes it walks quietly into a ballroom wearing a black dress and a secret. 3 days after the rainstorm, Damien Ashford stood beneath the enormous crystal ceiling of the Whitmore Foundation Gala adjusting the cufflinks on his dark navy tuxedo while Manhattan's wealthiest families floated around him in diamonds and champagne. The ballroom overlooked Central Park 30 floors above the city. A string quartet played softly near towering windows while servers carried silver trays through the crowd like synchronized dancers. Damien hated charity galas. Too many fake smiles. Too many strategic handshakes disguised as generosity. But tonight mattered. Ashford Capital was negotiating a partnership with the Whitmore Hospitality Group, one of the largest luxury restaurant empires on the East Coast. The founder himself, Charles Whitmore, almost never appeared publicly anymore, which meant every billionaire in New York suddenly cared deeply about charity. Smile more, Victor Laurent muttered beside Damien while accepting a glass of champagne. You look like you are preparing for tax fraud instead of dinner. Damien ignored him. His attention drifted across the ballroom automatically, analyzing faces, investors, competitors. Then he froze slightly. Clara Whitmore walked into the ballroom wearing a simple black evening dress that transformed the entire room without trying to. No heavy jewelry. No dramatic entrance. Just quiet elegance. Her blonde hair rested loosely against her shoulders while soft piano music drifted through the crowd around her. Damien stared openly for the first time since meeting her. Not because she looked beautiful, although she did. It was because she looked completely natural here. Like the chandeliers and marble and old money conversations belonged to her world far more than the restaurant uniform ever had. Victor noticed immediately. That waitress again. Damien frowned slightly. She is not just a waitress. Apparently not. Clara crossed the ballroom calmly greeting donors and executives with effortless confidence. Several older investors seemed delighted to see her. One elderly woman kissed her cheek affectionately. Another man asked her opinion about a vineyard acquisition in Napa Valley. Damien watched carefully. Confused. Curious. Slightly unsettled. How exactly does your restaurant waitress know half the people in this room? Victor asked quietly. Before Damien could answer, the ballroom lights softened near the stage. A voice echoed through hidden speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Thank you for joining us tonight. Applause rippled politely across the room as Charles Whitmore slowly stepped onto the stage. Silver-haired, distinguished, one of the last old-school hospitality legends in America. Damien had met him only once years earlier during a merger discussion in Chicago. The older man spoke briefly about scholarships and restaurant workers and the dignity of service before smiling warmly toward the crowd. And finally, Charles said gently, "None of this would exist without the person who reminds me daily why kindness matters more than status." He extended one hand toward the ballroom entrance. "My daughter, Clara Whitmore." Silence. Real silence. Damien turned slowly. Clara stood beneath golden chandelier light, looking suddenly uncomfortable as hundreds of guests applauded around her. Not dramatic applause. Warm applause. Familiar applause. The kind reserved for someone deeply loved. Victor inhaled sharply beside Damien. "You have got to be kidding me." Clara walked toward the stage quietly while Charles opened his arms and kissed the top of her head affectionately. Damien felt the entire week replay instantly inside his mind. The French, the piano, the wine knowledge, the confidence, the impossible calm. Every single clue had been sitting directly in front of him, and somehow he had still assumed waitress before daughter. Clara accepted the microphone reluctantly. "Please stop clapping," she said softly. "You are making this deeply awkward." Laughter rolled gently through the ballroom. Even Charles smiled proudly. "Most of you know I work evenings at Maison Riviere," Clara continued. "Yes," voluntarily. "No, my father still hates it." Charles sighed dramatically into his champagne while the crowd laughed again. Damien remained motionless. Clara glanced briefly across the ballroom. Their eyes met for half a second. There was no triumph in her expression. No revenge. Somehow that made it worse. "Restaurants are strange places," Clara said quietly into the microphone. "You learn very quickly how differently people treat you when they believe you are unimportant." The room softened around her words. Some customers barely look at servers. Others tell you their entire life story before dessert. Gentle laughter again. Then Clara smiled faintly. "And occasionally someone insults your French accent by accident." Half the ballroom laughed instantly, while Damien closed his eyes briefly in disbelief. Victor nearly collapsed beside him, trying not to choke on champagne. Clara finally looked directly toward Damien across the ballroom. Not cruelly, almost kindly. "But sometimes," she continued softly, "people surprise you too." Something shifted inside Damien then. Small, quiet, dangerous. Because for the first time in years, a woman had every reason in the world to embarrass him publicly. And instead, she protected his dignity. Charles wrapped one arm proudly around his daughter's shoulders while applause filled the ballroom once more. But Damien barely heard any of it. He only watched Clara standing beneath warm golden light, looking nothing like the arrogant socialites he normally dated, and somehow more extraordinary than every single one of them combined. Embarrassment reveals character faster than success ever will. By the next morning, Manhattan had already turned Damien Ashford into a joke. His phone began vibrating before sunrise. 43 unread messages. 12 missed calls. 3 separate news alerts. Damien sat alone in his penthouse kitchen staring at the headline glowing across his tablet while coffee slowly cooled untouched beside him. Billionaire mocks waitress. Unaware she is hotel heiress. Another article read, "The French lesson he will never forget." Someone had even turned the story into a meme, comparing Damien's expression at the gala to a man realizing he accidentally insulted royalty at dinner. Victor Laurent sent a text consisting entirely of laughing emojis and the sentence, "Honestly, this is the best thing that has happened to Wall Street in months." Damien dropped the phone onto the marble counter and closed his eyes briefly. Oddly enough, the humiliation itself did not bother him most. He had survived corporate scandals worth billions. Public embarrassment was temporary. What unsettled him was something else entirely. Clara had protected him when she easily could have destroyed him. That stayed in his head far longer than the headlines. Across Manhattan, Maison Riviere buzzed with excitement before lunch service even began. Every waiter had read the story. Every bartender had opinions. "You officially won the internet," one hostess whispered dramatically as Clara tied her apron behind the front desk. Clara groaned softly. "I did not ask the internet to get involved." Too late. The bartender slid his phone across the counter, showing another article. "Look," someone edited a tiny French flag above his head. Clara laughed despite herself before quickly covering her mouth. Okay, that one is a little funny. A little, the bartender wheezed. You publicly humbled the most intimidating billionaire in New York. Clara adjusted menus calmly. I corrected his pronunciation. In front of 400 people. Before Clara could answer, the restaurant doors opened quietly. The entire front room shifted almost instantly. Damien Ashford walked inside wearing a dark gray coat and carrying the controlled calm of a man pretending he had not become social media entertainment overnight. Several staff members immediately pretended to clean things that were already clean. One waiter nearly dropped an entire tray of glasses trying not to stare. Damien ignored all of it. His eyes found Clara immediately. She stood near the hostess station, holding reservation menus against her chest. For one brief second, neither of them moved. Then Clara spoke first. Well, Damien removed his gloves slowly. Well, you survived. Barely. Clara bit the inside of her cheek, trying not to smile. The tiny French flag was excessive. Damien blinked once. You saw that? Everyone saw that. A dangerous silence hovered between them before Damien unexpectedly sighed. I deserve at least some of this. Clara looked genuinely surprised by the honesty. Damien glanced around the restaurant quietly. I walked into this place assuming I understood people within 5 seconds of meeting them. His voice stayed calm, controlled. Then you proved otherwise repeatedly. Clara softened slightly, but folded her arms anyway. That sounds suspiciously close to personal growth. Do not ruin my reputation. She laughed softly before catching herself. The sound seemed to relax Damien more than the apology ever could have. Several waitresses exchanged stunned looks across the dining room. Nobody had ever seen Damien Ashford willingly become the joke in a conversation. For what it is worth, Clara said gently. I never wanted people mocking you online. Damien leaned lightly against the hostess stand. You could have embarrassed me much worse at the gala. Clara shrugged one shoulder. Public humiliation is lazy. Damien stared at her carefully. You really are different from everyone I know. Before Clara could respond, an older dishwasher named Louise suddenly appeared, carrying heavy supply boxes toward the kitchen entrance. One slipped awkwardly from the top stack. Damien reacted instantly, stepping forward to catch it before it hit the floor. The entire kitchen doorway froze. Louise blinked in confusion. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. Damien adjusted the box casually. It weighs less than quarterly earnings reports. Clara watched silently as Damien carried the remaining supplies into the kitchen without hesitation while several cooks stared in complete disbelief. A month ago, Damien himself would have found the image ridiculous. But strangely, it felt normal now. When he returned, Clara looked at him differently. Softer somehow. Careful, she murmured. At this rate, people might start thinking you are nice. Damien lowered his voice slightly. That would be catastrophic for my brand. Clara laughed again. This time fully, warm enough that even the pianist near the bar looked up smiling. And standing there beneath soft afternoon light and the quiet clatter of dishes, Damien realized something uncomfortable. He no longer came to Maison Rivière to win conversations. He came because for the first time in years, someone made him feel less lonely than successful. The people who carry the most quietly are usually the ones who had every reason to become arrogant. Snow drifted softly across Manhattan 3 weeks later, while Maison Rivière glowed warm against the winter evening like something untouched by the noise of the city outside. Business had become strangely overwhelming since the gala incident. Customers now requested Clara's section specifically. Investors visited hoping to witness the famous French waitress. One influencer even pretended to spill wine near Damien's table hoping for dramatic footage. Clara banned him from the restaurant in under 30 seconds. Damien had laughed about it for an entire week. Tonight, however, the restaurant felt calmer, slower. Jazz music floated gently beneath candlelight, while snow collected against the windows overlooking Lexington Avenue. Damien sat alone, near the piano reviewing documents on his tablet, when he noticed Clara standing near the back office speaking quietly with an older dishwasher whose daughter had apparently received a college acceptance letter. Clara hugged the man immediately before disappearing briefly into the office. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying an envelope. The dishwasher's eyes filled instantly. Damien watched carefully as the older man tried to refuse whatever she had handed him. Clara simply closed his fingers around it gently and smiled. No performance. No audience. just kindness. Later that night, after the dinner rush faded, Damien found Clara reorganizing wine inventory alone in the cellar beneath the restaurant. Wooden racks stretched across brick walls lined with bottles worth more than most apartments. Soft yellow lighting reflected against glass, while quiet music drifted faintly from upstairs. "You gave Luis money," Damien said calmly from the doorway. Clara did not look up immediately. "You were spying on me?" "Observing. That is billionaire language for spying." Damien stepped farther inside. His daughter got into Colombia. Clara finally glanced toward him while adjusting labels on a Bordeaux bottle. "She deserved help." "You paid her tuition?" Clara shrugged lightly. "Part of it." Damien stared at her silently. "You do that often? Does it matter?" "Yes." Clara sighed softly before sitting on the small ladder beside the wine racks. "My father built hotels from nothing," she said quietly. Before the money, before the headlines, he washed dishes in Chicago for 14 hours a day. Damien leaned against the brick wall, listening carefully. "He used to tell me the people who carry trays and clean kitchens know more about human beings than most executives ever will." Clara smiled faintly. "So when I turned 21, he offered me a corner office. And instead you became a waitress." "Temporarily." Damien folded his arms. "For 4 years." Clara laughed softly. "It started as rebellion." "Against what?" "Everything." She looked down briefly at the dusty wine bottle, turning slowly between her fingers. "Private schools. Charity galas. Men who memorized wine labels, but never learned their servers' names." Damien winced slightly at the accuracy. Clara noticed immediately. "You are improving," she admitted gently. That almost sounded self-aware. He ignored the comment. "So you walked away from all of it?" Clara nodded once. "I wanted to know whether people respected me or just my last name." Silence settled softly around them. Somewhere upstairs a glass shattered, followed by distant laughter. "And?" Damien asked quietly. Clara smiled sadly. "Turns out most people are very kind to rich girls." Her eyes lifted toward him finally. "But waitresses?" She shook her head lightly. "People tell waitresses exactly who they are." Damien felt something uncomfortable tighten quietly in his chest. Because suddenly every conversation since the night they met replayed differently inside his head. The assumptions, the arrogance, the effortless way he had categorized her before truly seeing her. Clara stood slowly and returned the wine bottle to its shelf. "You know the strange part," she murmured. "I actually love this job." Damien watched her carefully. "Because of the people? Because of the honesty?" She smiled faintly. "Nobody pretends around restaurant staff. Couples break up over appetizers. Investors panic over steak temperatures. Mothers cry in bathrooms. Lonely men flirt badly in 3 languages." Damien laughed quietly despite himself. Clara stepped closer, holding a small notebook filled with handwritten wine inventory notes. "And occasionally billionaires learn humility beside the dessert menu." Their eyes met. Closer now in the warm cellar light. Damien noticed a tiny ink stain on her wrist. Clara noticed the exhaustion hidden beneath his calm expression. "You really changed things for me," Damien admitted suddenly. Clara blinked once. "That sounds dangerously sincere." "I mean it." His voice softened. "Before meeting you, I cannot remember the last time someone challenged me without wanting something in return." Clara looked away first. That alone surprised her. "Most people are afraid of you," she said quietly. Damien nodded once. "I know. I was too." He frowned slightly. "You hid it well." Clara smiled softly. "I was afraid I would like you." The words hung between them in complete stillness. No jazz. No kitchen noise. Only the quiet hum of cellar lights and snow falling somewhere far above the city. Damien looked at her differently then. Not curiosity anymore. Not fascination. Something deeper. Slower. More dangerous because it felt real. And standing between ancient wine bottles and old brick walls beneath Manhattan, Clara suddenly realized she was no longer pretending Damien Ashford was simply another customer passing through her life. Sometimes love begins the exact moment pride finally becomes willing to look ridiculous. 2 weeks later, Manhattan woke beneath clear winter sunlight for the first time in days. Snow melted slowly along sidewalks while steam curled upward from subway grates and coffee carts on busy corners. Inside Maison Rivière, lunch service had barely started when Clara nearly dropped an entire tray of cappuccinos in shock. Damien Ashford was standing beside the hostess station, holding a small paperback. French dictionary. No, Clara said immediately. Absolutely not. Damien looked offended. I am expanding my education. You are carrying a tourist dictionary with the Eiffel Tower on the cover. It was recommended. By who? Damien hesitated. A 12-year-old in the bookstore. Clara closed her eyes briefly while the bartender collapsed laughing behind the counter. Damien ignored both of them with surprising dignity. I have decided, he announced calmly, that if I am going to continue embarrassing myself in your presence, I should at least do it with grammatical accuracy. Clara stared at him for one dangerous second before laughter escaped her completely. Warm, bright, uncontrolled. Several customers turned immediately toward the sound. Damien watched her quietly, almost distracted by how different she looked when she forgot to stay composed. That, he murmured softly, was worth the humiliation. Clara recovered slowly while placing coffee cups onto nearby tables. You are impossible, and yet you keep talking to me. Over the following days, Damien continued returning to the restaurant carrying increasingly ridiculous attempts at improvement. One afternoon, he tried ordering lunch entirely in French and accidentally informed the chef he wished to emotionally marry a potato. Clara laughed so hard she had to sit down behind the hostess desk while the kitchen staff applauded sarcastically. Another evening, he practiced wine pronunciation with such aggressive concentration that Victor Laurent finally muttered, "Watching billionaires flirt is deeply exhausting." But something else changed too. Quiet things. Real things. Damien started learning every employee's name. He noticed when dishwashers worked double shifts and sent dinner home with them quietly. He stopped taking business calls during meals. One snowy evening, Clara caught him helping Mrs. Green from the bookstore carry groceries across the street while pretending not to realize she was deliberately adding extra bags to test him. Your posture is terrible, Mrs. Green complained loudly. I survived hostile corporate takeovers, Damien replied, while carrying 3 paper bags through the snow. This is worse. Clara watched from the restaurant window, smiling before she could stop herself. The city had started changing him slowly. Or maybe she had. Late one evening after closing, Clara found Damien sitting alone near the piano with his jacket folded beside him and 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. Snow drifted softly outside the windows while the restaurant glowed warm and empty around them. You bribed the staff to let you stay after hours again, Clara said. Damien slid 1 coffee toward her. Technically, I charmed them. With money. Money can be charming. Clara sat across from him, shaking her head. You are never escaping your billionaire instincts entirely, are you? Damien looked at her quietly over the rim of his coffee cup. Do you want me to? The question settled softly between them. Clara looked away first. Dangerous. Everything about him had become dangerous lately. Not because he was powerful, because he had started becoming sincere. Damien reached into his coat pocket suddenly and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I prepared something. Clara narrowed her eyes suspiciously. That sentence has never ended well in human history. Damien unfolded the paper carefully. I asked Victor's niece for help with pronunciation. Clara immediately started laughing before he even spoke. Damien ignored her with impressive determination and began reading slowly in French. Je voudrais apprendre, comment, any plus être, un idiot arrogant. Clara blinked through laughter. Did you just say you would like to learn how to stop being an arrogant idiot? That was the goal. Your accent still sounds emotionally expensive. Damien groaned softly while dropping the paper onto the table. Clara laughed harder, covering her face with both hands now. The sound filled the empty restaurant like music. Real happiness. Unforced. Damien stared at her the entire time with a softness that would have shocked every executive who had ever feared him in a boardroom. Finally, Clara lowered her hands slowly. You practiced that? Damien nodded once. For 3 hours. That somehow makes it more embarrassing. Excellent. Then I am improving. Silence settled gently. Afterward, snow drifting outside, piano glowing beneath dim amber light, coffee cooling slowly between them. Clara looked at Damien carefully then, at the man who once measured human value within seconds of meeting them, at the billionaire now willingly humiliating himself just to make her laugh after long shifts. Why are you trying so hard? She asked quietly. Damien did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed on hers. Calm. Honest. Because, he said softly, for the first time in a very long time, someone makes me want to become better instead of simply more successful. Clara felt her heartbeat stumble slightly against her ribs. And somewhere deep beneath the quiet jazz and falling snow and soft restaurant light, both of them realized the truth at the exact same moment. This was no longer flirting. This was becoming love. In the end, the people who change our lives rarely arrive looking powerful. Sometimes they arrive carrying a tray and quietly teaching us how to become human again. Spring arrived slowly in Manhattan. Snow disappeared from sidewalks. Outdoor cafes reopened beneath strings of golden lights. Central Park turned green again, while Maison Rivière remained exactly what it had always been beneath the noise of the city outside. Warm, familiar, alive. Except now, whenever Damien Ashford walked through the restaurant doors, nobody stiffened nervously anymore. The dishwashers waved at him. The bartenders mocked his French openly. Mrs. Green from the bookstore occasionally sent over homemade cookies labeled for the recovering billionaire. Somehow, against all logic, Damien had become part of the place. On a quiet Thursday evening nearly 4 months after the night they first met, Clara finished balancing receipts behind the front counter while soft jazz drifted through the nearly empty dining room. The restaurant had already slowed after dinner service. Candlelight flickered gently across polished glasses. Outside, warm rain tapped softly against the windows. "You are smiling at paperwork," the bartender whispered dramatically while passing behind her. This is how romantic comedies begin. Clara rolled her eyes. "Go home, Daniel." "I would," he said while grabbing his coat. "But watching billionaires fall in love with waitresses has become my favorite hobby." Before Clara could throw a receipt at him, the restaurant doors opened quietly. Damien stepped inside carrying no phone, no assistant, no security detail. Just himself. Clara noticed immediately. "You are late," she said softly. Damien loosened his tie while approaching her slowly. "I was practicing." Clara narrowed her eyes. "That sentence continues to terrify me." Damien smiled faintly before gesturing toward the corner table near the piano. The very first table where he had mocked her months earlier. Now a single candle glowed there beside 2 untouched coffee cups. Clara looked at him carefully. "You planned this." "Terribly," he admitted. "I rewrote the speech 3 times." "There is a speech?" "There was." Damien exhaled quietly. "Now I am improvising and deeply regretting it." Clara laughed softly before walking with him toward the table. Rain shimmered beyond the windows while the old piano played automatically through hidden speakers above the bar. The restaurant felt suspended in time somehow, like the city had paused briefly to let something important happen. Damien pulled out her chair awkwardly. Clara sat slowly without breaking eye contact. "You know," she murmured, "the first night we met, I was completely certain I would hate you forever." Damien sat across from her with a tired smile. "Honestly, fair. You were arrogant. Still working on that. You spoke French like a man emotionally threatening pastries." Damien covered his face briefly while Clara laughed again. God, he loved that sound. "But then," Clara continued more quietly, "you kept coming back." Damien rested his hands against the table. "Because you made me feel seen." The honesty in his voice softened her expression instantly. "Most people saw the money first," he said quietly. "The reputation. The headlines." His eyes lifted toward hers. "You were the first person in years who looked at me like I was simply a man capable of being wrong." Clara swallowed gently. Outside, rain continued sliding down the glass in silver lines. "You changed too," Damien said softly. "You know that, right?" Clara looked down briefly. "I did not plan to trust you. I did not plan to need your opinion on literally everything." She smiled faintly. "Your French is still terrible. Cruel. Accurate." Damien reached slowly into his coat pocket. Clara raised one eyebrow immediately. "If that is another dictionary, I am leaving." He laughed quietly before placing a small folded napkin on the table instead. Clara unfolded it carefully. Written across the paper in slightly crooked French handwriting were the words, "Merci de m'avoir appris la gentillesse." "Thank you for teaching me kindness." Clara stared at the sentence silently. Then at him. "Victor's niece helped again, did she not?" Damien sighed dramatically. "A little." Clara laughed softly before her expression slowly changed. "Gentler now. More vulnerable. You really practiced this." "For 6 hours. That is almost sad." "I was aiming for romantic." Their eyes held. Long enough that neither of them looked away this time. The piano music softened. Somewhere in the kitchen, a dishwasher laughed faintly before the restaurant fell quiet again. Damien spoke first. Calmly. Honestly. I love you, Clara. No performance. No grand billionaire gesture. Just truth. Simple enough to matter. Clara felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes. Not because of the words themselves. Because she believed him completely. She reached across the table slowly and took his hand for the first time. Warm. Steady. Real. You know, she whispered with a small smile, your French still sounds emotionally expensive. Damien laughed softly beneath his breath while holding her hand tighter. And yet you stayed. Clara looked at him beneath golden candlelight, while rain softened Manhattan beyond the windows, and realized something beautiful. Somewhere between the mockery in the bookstore and the wine cellar and the terrible French lessons, they had stopped being a billionaire and a waitress. They had simply become two people who finally understood that kindness mattered more than status, and love sounded far more beautiful than pride in any language. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from. And subscribe to When He Chose Her channel for more emotional stories about love, dignity, and unexpected second chances. Your support helps us bring more cinematic storytelling moments to life every week. Stay until the next story, because sometimes the quietest people change everything.